Tonight's topic is part 2 of what we have started last night. So I have already told you that we are now one of the top 15 diabetes hotspots in the world, according to the World Health Organization. And for those of you who are trying to avoid costly hospitalizations, this disease is something that you do not want to have, because you do not want to have heart disease, blindness, amputations, and kidney failure. Last night, we also talked about the things that we are to avoid if we do not want diabetes, like sugary foods, trans fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, and ensuring that we have fiber, like from the fruits and vegetables, and also to maintain a healthy weight if we want to avoid this dreaded disease. But some of us would like to ask, yes, avoiding sugary foods is obviously avoiding foods like soft drinks and maybe donuts. But how about fruits? Don't they have sugar too? If we ask the American Diabetes Association, they say there is no reason to avoid the naturally occurring fructose, that's the sugar, in fruits, vegetables, and other foods. You see, for an average non-diabetic person, he can have as much as around 300 grams of carbohydrates in a day. But a diabetic person cannot do so. He or she must have a limit of around 180 grams of carbohydrate in a day. But you should remember that your needs, a person with diabetes has more or less of this, depending on how worse their condition is and depending on their management. So please, you have to take care of this number. It's not a fixed number. You have to talk to your doctor about this. You have to talk to your dietitian about this. But since, let's say a diabetic has this limit with carbohydrates, if he had 3 cups of rice in a day, that would amount to 120 grams of carbohydrates. And if we add 1/2 cup of mango, you add just 13 grams more. That's 133 grams. So you still have allowance to fit in some more servings actually of fruits in your daily diet. So it is okay for those with diabetes to consume these fruits as long as they know how to count their carbohydrates and as long as they maintain their total carbohydrates within the limits. So if you want to take notes, now's the time to take note of how much on average is the carbohydrates per serving of these fruits. So it's everything is around 15 to 20. Okay? The Mayo Clinic also commented that it is a common myth that if you have diabetes, you shouldn't eat certain foods because they are too sweet. Some fruits do contain more sugar, like mango probably, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't eat them if you have diabetes. Also, for those with diabetes, it is important to know foods that have a low and a high glycemic index. Last night, I already introduced to you the concept of some carbohydrate sources having simple sugars, like your sodas, soft drinks, and cakes. And there are those that are composed of complex carbohydrates, such as your whole wheat bread, your oats. They're made of complex sugars that has to be converted to the simpler ones before being absorbed in your body. Now, foods that have a high glycemic index tend to increase your blood sugar faster, like a donut perhaps. It has a high glycemic index, and you would expect the blood sugar to also rise higher faster. So if food has a high glycemic index, it is absorb faster. And so their blood sugar will increase faster. Here's a diagram that I would like to show you. If you eat food items that have a high glycemic index, so they are rapidly absorbed in your bloodstream, the blood sugar, the total blood sugar in your blood would rise faster, and that would be problematic to a person with diabetes, because if you can remember, there is something interfering with the work of insulin. That's why it cannot open the door, and so all of this sugar will just be around trying to enter, but of course they cannot. And so having items in their diet that has a high glycemic index will not be helpful for them. On the other hand, diabetics should have food items that have a low to medium glycemic index because they are absorbed more gradually. And so the rise in blood sugar will not be as dramatic. It will be slower. So after eating food with a high glycemic index, there will be a rapid increase. You see this in just a few hours. There will be a rapid increase in blood sugar, then a rapid decrease. And so some of these patients will actually have episodes of hypoglycemia after a few hours because all the sugar has been used up already. In contrast, foods with a low glycemic index will give you a steady and continuous supply of your sugar. That's something that you want for a person with diabetes. So let's see what are the examples of these foods. You can take note of this number, but I think it would be more important to take note of these examples. In the vegetables and root crops group, we can see that almost all of them are in this low glycemic index category. The corn and the sweet potatoes belong to the medium, and potatoes, which is actually a good source of carbohydrate, is found in the high group. But the University of Sydney has commented that even though potatoes have a high glycemic index, you shouldn't avoid these foods because they have good content when it comes to micronutrients like minerals like your magnesium and potassium. And they have a medium glycemic load, meaning they have a medium total carbohydrate or sugar content. Let's go to the fruit section. You can see that almost all of the items are in the low to the medium group, as long as you don't turn all of this into juice, because they would tend to be on the high category. Nuts, all of them are in the low glycemic index. Beans, all of them are in the low glycemic index. And when it comes to these food items, you can see that white rice, white bread, highly processed bread, are glutinous rice, which we use for our sweet delicacies here in the Philippines, actually belong to the high glycemic index, which are the foods that we are trying to avoid if you want to control your blood sugar. So you can choose between oats and the other varieties of the rice that you can see in the screen. And finally, for some of the food items that we love to eat, you can see the cakes and the donuts and soft drinks, and pretty much all our favorites are in the high glycemic index category. Please don't make the mistake of thinking that this cake belongs to the low glycemic index. It belongs to the high glycemic index. All of this. Okay? So whenever you find an item that is very attracting to the eyes, that you just want to eat it, most likely it's something from the high glycemic index category. If you want to know more, or there's items that you cannot find on my list, you can go to this website, and you just type there the food item, and they'll show you what's the glycemic index of that certain food item. What else? dietary fiber is recommended for those with diabetes. And they found out that not only it is good for them, it is also good for reducing their risk for heart disease. And if I ask you again, where do you find fiber? Where is it found? Fruits and vegetables, and it's very high in beans. And how about the other group? How much fiber does the following group have? They have 0 fiber, and it has everything that you don't want, like saturated fat and cholesterol. Compared to this other group, which has 0 cholesterol, 0 trans fat, and almost 0 saturated fat. You also have to reduce your salt intake. They found out that it should be less than 2,500 milligrams in a day, but because those with diabetes have an increased risk for heart disease, they recommend lowering it down to around 1,500 milligrams a day, which means that you have to avoid items or limit these items like your canned goods, which are high in salt. I've been in the grocery this week and I just look at this. I would not name the brands, but these meat products, canned meat products, has around 500 milligrams of sodium per serving, which means if you had one slice, that's already around 500 milligrams of sodium. Chips, noodles, and broth, stock broth, cubes, I mean. And these are the items that you want to limit or avoid in your diet if you are trying to reduce your salt intake. You also want to avoid alcohol because it increases the risk of hypoglycemia for those with diabetes. In a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine, they tried to compare one of the best medicines that we have today, one of the safest, in fact, metformin, with lifestyle change, and they found out that, of course, the drug works. It reduced the incidence of diabetes by 31%. However, the other group, which was given a lifestyle change that includes reducing their weight, reducing total fat and saturated fat in their diets, increasing their fiber and physical activity, they found out that they had an even lower incidence of diabetes by around 58%. And so they concluded that lifestyle intervention was particularly effective. It was supported by all the major health institutions, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the American Diabetes Association, and even the drug company that made the drug. They had to agree. So you can manage diabetes with this, or you can prevent, manage, and potentially reverse the complications with a proper diet and physical activity. In conclusion, if you don't want diabetes, you have to avoid high glycemic foods. You have to avoid trans fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol. You have to include foods that have lower glycemic index in your diet and increase your fiber consumption.